Welcome to the Equity Institute's podcast on the purpose of public education with me, your host, Vincent Perez. Today, we'll be talking with Dr. José Gonzalez. I first met José in the summer of 2014 in Tucson, Arizona, where they held Chito Institute, the XITO, the Chicanx Institute for Teaching and Organizing, a 3-day event that really impacted my practice and my personal life. This introduction into ethnic studies and the way that they had used it at Chito has really impacted my day-to-day work. José is a longtime educator serving in culturally relevant American history, government, and social justice in both the middle school and the high school level. It is an honor to know and to befriend Dr. José Gonzalez. Please welcome. Well, thank you, José, for being here. It's such a pleasure and an honor. I appreciate spending some time with you. For our audience, could you share a little bit about who you are and your connection to public education?
Right. Well, thank you, Vincent. It's always a pleasure to be, in a community with you. But my name's José Gonzalez, and have been in the field of education in different capacities, but mostly as a classroom teacher, specifically an ethnic studies teacher for the past 32 years. I've also developed for the district curricula. I was what's known as a curriculum specialist. I did that for about, close to 10 years with the Mexican American Raza Studies Department. And now today I find myself also working for the district as a teacher mentor, teacher coach for culturally responsive teachers, but been in the field for the past 32 years, graduated. I live and work here in Tucson. I've been a teacher of record here within the Tucson Unified School District since 1994, and I'm looking forward at retiring at the conclusion of this academic school year. But that's a little bit about myself. I'm also a part of a collective of teachers known as Chito. It's an acronym which corresponds each letter to the Chicanx Institute for Teaching and Organizing.
So with that breadth of experience, and I myself who've attended Chito, and it significantly changed my life, my practice. I mean, my inner life, my personal life, as well as my engagement with students, and certainly around using this indigenous epistemology that you provide at Chito as a framework. So that's my experience with you all. I'm curious though, from your, being in the classroom all these years now as a teacher coach, what is the purpose of public education?
I think that's a loaded question. I think historically we have to contextualize it, right? And public education has a very privileged positionality, right? In that we look at the Puritans, right? When they started that education, it was classist in nature, is also racist. Certain individuals is also sexist in nature, right? And so that form of education in the 1840s, then you have, I believe, is Horace Mann, right? And I think most teachers, most people within the field of education will define it accordingly. And that is the purpose of education is to produce workers for this capitalistic society, right? Now, they won't say it in those words, but they'll beat around the bush. We're here to produce individuals that can matriculate not into universities, into the workforce, right? And so with that said, public education, as I know it, the purpose is one of liberation, right? And who informs me on this when I first read him was Paulo Freire. It's one of liberation. And so the purpose of public education should be to create stable, spiritual, thriving human beings, right? In whatever capacity they would like to direct their passion, their commitment towards, right? But of course, we know, right, that a universal educational system, and again, the first group of people to establish what's known as compulsory education, I like to refer to it as universal education, were the Mexica people, the Aztecs, and so they used to refer to them as Calmecas, which were the university, which more of like a university, and then they started in what was like a primary, secondary at the age of 13. 13 is a very sacred number in that indigenous epistemology or indigenous way of knowing. But 13 years old, they started what was known as the school. They were called Tepochcalis, right? A place of learning, a house of learning. I think that is the purpose, right? I think that is the purpose of education is to look at the young people we are charged to work with and for, and help them develop not just intellectually, but emotionally, physically, and most importantly, spiritually, right? And I think that should be the purpose of public education. It is not, right? We have to contend with what Freire refers to as banking education, which stems from the progressive era within the United States of public education, where Taylor, who was an engineer by trade, was attempting to make public education more efficient, and therefore made it into what's known as an assembly line, right? So that's what we're contending against, that ideology. I also agree with some scholars, Ernest Morel, as well as Duncan Andrade, professors at San Francisco, Cal State University, SFSU. They wrote a book, The Art of Pedagogy. And in there, the premise is that schools are not failing. They're working exactly as designed, and they're reproducing the inequality. So that, in a nutshell, is what I think the purpose of education should be, but it is not the conventional view of what public education is.
I appreciate you breaking down the question. I how folks interpret it, right, is just even there can take us on a pathway of what can be, I think, at its best, K-12 public education, and what it has been for many people. So I'm curious then, when we look to the side of developing stable human beings, which I wholeheartedly agree it can be at its best, again, the purpose. What knowledge, skills, and attributes do students need to be stable human beings? And you're talking about the whole child, as some refer to, right? The whole human being. I'm curious what you've seen really work. Are there models or philosophies, approaches that you've seen in practice and policy that actually really support that human development?
It's important to, I think, always keep in mind that here in the United States, we have rights, and I'm drawing from Howard Zinn, and these rights are not guaranteed. If we're not involved in movements, those rights are going to be ignored and denied to us, right? And so with that said, I think that what we were doing with the MARS program, the Mexican American Raza Studies program, is an exemplar program that really pushed back to that narrative that Latinx students didn't care about their education. They didn't have the intellectual capacity, what's known as deficit theory, deficit discourse, right? Deficit narratives, and really pushed back, at that idea. What we were able to do within that ethnic studies model was produce students who were really grounded in who they were. And by that, we utilized that indigenous way of knowing, the Nawi Olin, where we asked our students to really look in their hearts and heal that trauma that they're dealing with. And from there, they get direction clarity, which is Chipetotec. And that clarity provides them stability in the sense of when they take action, which Huitzilopochtli, that action is positive in the sense that it's building and not destroying. And from there, we get what's known as Quetzalcoatl within that frame, within that way of knowing, Quetzalcoatl, which is stability and a humanizing world. And so we were able to really share that with our students. They found themselves, and within that, they were also engaging their community. They were matriculating into universities at a 97% rate, which is unheard of at that time in 2012. I think the national average was like 46%. Mexican American students within the United States was at 50% 56%, and we were graduating students at a 97% rate. We were also able to instill within our students this academic identity. I think that all ethnic studies programs must be rigorous, right? And we liken it to the Calmeca of the Aztecas, right? Preparing them for that university. And that university level, our students were reading books like Faces at the Bottom of the Well by Derek Bell, right? Annotating. And so the skills that we were developing, and it's important to frame it like that, right? The skills we were developing was their writing, their reading, thinking, right? Reasoning skills, and through Frary, we utilize those methodology, if you will, and of course their oratory skills, right? And so students were able to they were matriculating into universities, higher ed, at a 70% rate, where the national average was 26% for Mexican Americans. And I think that is the model, the exemplar program for ethnic studies. We were able to accomplish that. And in 2012, the state came in and closed us down, accused us of one of the prongs, right? Accused us of overthrowing the United States government, among other things, right? And so they shut the program down. Despite the data that we had, right? The MARS program is one of the most scrutinized programs in the United States, right? We were the first department within the United States. Now, there were always been Chicanic studies, Black studies classes, but we were institutionalized throughout the district, right? We were a department, and our charge was to provide history and literature to the students within Tucson Unified School District. And we did that. We were the most scrutinized, surveilled program in the history of the United States. And I don't think there's no hyperbole there. Just to situate where we're at, we're in the state of Arizona, a very red state, right? And so we were able to accomplish this despite this. Our students were, back then, it was high stakes testing was involved. It was known as AIMS, Arizona Instrument of Measurement. And back then in 2000, all the way up to like, I want to say 2013, students could not graduate from high school unless they passed this AIMS test. And our students were taking the AIMS test, and they were passing, right, with a higher rate than their European American counterparts that were also taking the AIMS test. So students that were enrolled in our classes, when they took the AIMS test, were overachieving and were really, by all intents purposes, man, they had fractured what's known as the achievement gap, right? Despite that pressure, we were able to produce those kind of results. And so most scrutinized, and getting back to that, most scrutinized program, there was TUSD studies that were conducted during our tenure from 2003 through 2012. Dr. Petticone, who was a superintendent, wasn't a supporter of the program, conducted his own study. And again, saying the results spoke to the efficacy of the program. You had the Cabrera report that was conducted, and then you had, of course, the Cambrian report. And all of this spoke to the efficacy of this department. So in answering your question, I believe that what we were able to do here in Tucson Unified School District under very difficult circumstances in regards to just not having the support of the institution, and what we were able to produce, I think, is the model program for the United States. And indeed, in 2012, when they closed our classes, you saw various K-12 ethnic studies programs in the state of Texas, and now in the state of California, Washington, Oregon, Kansas as well. And that all sprung after our classes were closed in 2012. And so what we were able to do is bring this ethnic studies model from a university into a public school setting.
In really empowering students, it sounds like grounding in who they are, in their hearts, right? And really considering how their actions affect the world, and intellectuals, orators, critical thinkers. My next question is around the challenges or obstacles in achieving this purpose of public education, but you're kind of speaking to that too. Like, the challenge in this experience, in this story, is the state saying that this is actually too good, that your teaching is actually too powerful. So I'm curious, what do you see as the challenges to this form of education, this form of liberatory experiences for students, and how have you responded to them?
As you mentioned, the state, and again, we can go back to the history of public education, right? The tension that's always been there is that factories, industry are beckoning, right? A workforce. And so that's going back to Horace Mann's definition of what public education's purpose is. We reject that wholeheartedly. Why did they close our classes down? right? And again, the state came after us, and not only the state, but individuals within power brokers within the city of Tucson came after us. And again, we had the numbers, the data to support that. Given that, I believe that and I'm drawing on Corky Gonzalez's work, that as educators, we have to go back into the school system and provide students this liberatory, emancipatory educational experience. Moreover, Corky Gonzalez charges Chicanx public school educators to teach them their history. And that is decolonizing, right? History is decolonizing. By that, I mean, it situates them here, right? Not as Hispanic, not as Latinx, right? But as raza, as folks whose ancestors come from this continent, right? When we use the word Hispanic, we reify. When we use the moniker label Latinx, we reify our colonization. But to teach history is healing in that sense, right? Because it situates them here on this continent, right? As you know, and again, it situates them on this continent, and it provides them an orientation. So I think providing that message is a threat to the state, and as such, ethnic studies is again, it's and that's what our classes were and are. Ethnic studies is contentious, right? We are pushing back at the state, and so I see that it is a responsibility for us as educators to go back into our communities and provide these pockets of liberatory spaces for our students and provide them the resources, right? Conscientization, right? The consciousness, the awareness of these institutions, and to teach them, bring them up to speed on the skill sets, right? And how they read, write, enter dialogue, discuss, and most definitely their cognitive thought processes, right? And this levels of consciousness, really being systemic thinkers and addressing systemic issues. That's where we get our agency from, right? When we begin to critique these institutions that honestly were never made for us, right? They were never made for people as beautiful, not only as us, but as Black folk, right? As working class folk, right? When I say that, working class white folk, as beautiful as Black folk, right? And definitely raza folk as well. And so really challenging that, and know that when you enter these spaces, if you're not on the cusp of being fired, you're not doing your job, right? If you're not challenging these institutions, if you're not in trouble, you're collecting a paycheck and you're part of the problem. And so to be an ethnic studies teachers is, again, to situate race and its intersections. And however uncomfortable that may feel, students are very comfortable to discuss and navigate those spaces, and creating those what bell hooks referred to as classrooms as places of possibility, right? Seeing our students as a possibility, right? Not as a liability. That's what I've done the past 30 years, is provide these spaces for students. I think this is the future, what's known as the Browning of America. And as a community that is growing, we will not go back to that teacher-centered curricular design that's Eurocentric in nature, right? And that reproduces that inequality. We will not go back. So we will continue to struggle for our children who are in public education to be provided an education not only uplifts them, right, but centers them and their humanity and puts that at the forefront, where our teachers are seeing our students again as possibilities and not as liabilities. And so that's what this work is about, right? It's about the Chicano movement of the 1960s. We're still in that, and definitely what we were a part of with the Mars program up until 2012. Today, with the culturally relevant department here in Tucson Unified School District, this is a part of a larger movement. The state, Tom Horn was reelected as a state superintendent, despite being found guilty of racial discrimination, or to use the language of lawyers, racial animus towards Mexicanos. He was reelected, and he is now the state superintendent of instruction again. We know that the state is coming back and is going to try to eliminate this. And although I'm going to be retired, I will be always involved in movements, asserting our rights as human beings on this continent, right? And most definitely in this country.
Thank you. I'm curious how you respond then to, as a historian and connecting students to their own stories and narratives and orienting themselves in this place, that is especially the United States. How do you respond to ideas that teaching history, African-American history, or talking about race is divisive?
My response to them is, when I engage with those folks, I always look for individuals that are what I refer to as folks that don't know better, right? But want to know, want to learn. Those individuals that are coming from the right, I don't waste my breath, my energy on them. But those people who I would refer to as fence setters, right? I would say to them, has public education as we know it, has it worked, right? And you have all these organizations that are data driven. What data do you have to support the efficacy of this teacher-centered, content-centered curricular design? And it just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, right? And so then my next question to them is, so ethnic studies is the anecdote, if you will. That is how I respond to them. And of course, they don't have the data to support that. And then if we get into a further conversation, then we begin to talk about what is that approach look like? What's the methodology, the pedagogical approach to that? But going back to these individuals that say that race makes folks feel uncomfortable, I think that's just a talking point to the right? And folks will throw that. I know I've had conversations with my administration, and so I asked them to think, well, how do our students, right, in Tucson Unified School District, 70% are Latinx, right, and then you have about 6% African American, 4% Native American, right? So they're the minority. Every day that they walk into this institution, they feel uncomfortable. They don't see themselves reflected in the math, right? In any discipline, right? They enter a space wherein competition is front and center, right? If they're Latinx students, right, they're one of their greatest asset is language, right? That's been stripped of them, and now they're learning English, right? They're English emergent students. And so how does that make them feel, right? Because it's been my experience, and certainly the data does support this, that students of color, people of color, are very comfortable discussing race and its intersections, right? So are we situated in a suburban area wherein 90%, 80%, 70%, that just doesn't exist anymore, right? Are European Americans? And so of course, the answer is no. But let's say, this is a suburban high school and 90%. I would argue that not talking about race, right, produces the society that we have today, right? That is an artifact. Donald Trump, right, does not become president in 2016 if we didn't have the first Black president, right? And it's a direct response to that. And so I would argue that. But ultimately, I don't engage in conversations with folks I don't feel asked and want to grow, right?
Yeah.
I only engage with those individuals that I think have a genuine interest in the question that they may ask, right? And how do I bring them along to be potentially, responsive to the students that they are privileged to work for and serve?
Appreciate that you just go to inquiry. Right. That's so let's ask some questions. I'm curious, on the other side, what calls to action would you have for our listeners?
I think the call to action is, and will continue to be, ethnic studies programs in K-12 settings, right, across the United States. If we look back at multicultural education in the 1960s, that was a response to the 60s movement. It was co-opted. We look at what's going on with liberated ethnic studies in California, right? That by Governor Newsom has been co-opted, right? And so the charge, I believe, is within this civil rights movement of providing an equitable education for all students, is centered, and we should focus on the tenets of ethnic studies, right? And joining movements that support and produce ethnic studies programs that do center race, right? That are culturally responsive, that have a comprehensive curricula that is representative of the individuals within that location or context, right? But definitely must address, the Black indigenous histories and stories, Chicanx, right? And let's just say raza, right? If we're in New York, Puerto Ricanos, etc., right? Raza, as well as Asian Pacific Islanders group, right? And others, right? And others as well. But I think and I believe that is our work, right? Is to agitate and to, despite the institution not wanting to be responsive to what the community wants, force the institution to change. And when I say change, to bring in these ethnic studies programs throughout the country, throughout the United States. And I think that's a charge moving forward.
Thank you. I've been wrapping these interviews up with a question about your own personal experience. How did you go to public education? If so, how did that impact you?
Yes, Vincent, I was a product of Tucson Unified School District, but my father had us in a parochial school, and I did that up until 8th grade. And then I matriculated into a public high school, Choya High School, specifically within Tucson Unified, graduated there. And, whether it was the nuns, and their punitive type of discipline, or, when I was at Choya, not seeing myself, right, represented in history. And I've always been history junkie, right? My father would drive to Mexico and he'd explain to us the name of the washes, the rivers, the mountains, the indigenous tribes. And so I've always had an interest in history and being in history class and not seeing myself represented. I can recall when my father had shared with me that asked what I was studying for. And I said, it was a test on World War II. And he responded with a 6th grade education, right? Said, mijito, nosotros peleamos con los Estados Unidos. He said, son, Mexico fought with the United States. And I looked at him, right, because it wasn't official knowledge, right? I looked at him. It wasn't coming from an institution like a school. I said, "Pa, that's not true. It's not true." So we'll look it up in the library. And he gave me the squadron lookup. And sure enough, he was right. And so that's what I was a product of, right? I can recall at Choya High School, a substitute teacher telling me that I was going to end up in prison and I didn't have the language, right? And it was just a simple question in algebra, right? But he was having a bad day and he took it out on me and said that in front of the class. And again, I didn't have the language and ended up getting suspended for that. So, schooling has always been something that I've endured. I lived, right? I survived. And the reason why I went into education is because I thought I could do better, right? My grandmother, my Nana Rita, when she found out I was going to become a teacher, she gave me these words of advice. She said, mijito, tienes que tentar el corazón de los estudiantes. Y cuando tientas su corazón, entonces puedes trabajar con su mente. And you have to touch your students' hearts first. And once you touch their heart, now you can work with their mind and their whole body. And so that's why I went into education, is because of my experience, not only in a parochial school with the nuns, but also at public education in Choya High School. Yeah. And so that's how it impacted me and really gave me a sense of direction as to what I wanted to do once my athletic career was over with.
How can folks find you if people are interested in Chito or? So
I would refer them to our Chito webpage, and my email is there as well. It's José at ChicanxInstitute.org. And hopefully, Vincent, we're going to be up in Washington in February. So definitely, they can participate in a Chito in-service professional development with your organization as well.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, Jose. I really appreciate it.
All right, brother. It's always a pleasure to be in space with you, man. Take care of yourself. And I look forward to seeing you in February.
Yep, me too.
All right, brother. Peace.
Yes.